Welcome to At the Table Bible Ministries. Thank you for joining me today and sharing of God's Word. We are going to go to the book of Exodus, chapter 20 first. I'm going to talk about the plagues of Egypt and how God judged the gods of the world at the time. And by saying gods, simply we're talking about the strongholds that Satan and the fallen angels had set up at the time. In Exodus chapter 20, we see the 10 commandments given. And let's start with verse 1, and they're very powerful verses. It says, "And God spake all these words, saying, I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make unto you any graven image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down yourself to them, nor serve them, for I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me, and showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments." So within the law of the Old Testament, it's in three sections. There's ceremonial law, there is sacrificial law, and then there is the moral law. Jesus fulfilled ceremonial and sacrificial law. However, the moral law of God, it never changes, okay? It's no longer written upon stone, but it is upon the flesh of our heart, and it is within our soul. We always follow the moral law of God. So God gives Moses the law, and the first commandments deal with God being God, and there's no other God. God is serious about this fact. I am God. He wants to restore relationship. We don't generalize God. Everyone's not just worshiping their own God with its own name, but it's the same one. Jesus is God. You have to go through the Son to get to the Father. In Exodus chapter 7, verse 1 through 3, and it says, "And the Lord said unto Moses, See, I have made thee a god to Pharaoh, and Aaron your brother shall be thy prophet. You shall speak all that I command you, and Aaron thy brother shall speak unto Pharaoh, that he send the children of Israel out of his land. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and multiply my signs and my wonders in the land of Egypt." At this time, the pharaohs over Egypt, they were served by priests, and the priests were the medium to the gods, aka the devils. So for Pharaoh to see and to understand what was going on in front of him, in order for him to respect the great I am, God was going to make Aaron as a prophet and a priest, and he was going to have Moses to appear as a god to Pharaoh because of the great works that God was going to bring through them. Moses was going to be the hand and voice for God in front of Pharaoh, so that Pharaoh would have eyes to see that the God that they worshipped was powerful. Signs and wonders always follow God. They always follow the power of God. If you live a God-anointed life, people will see the work of the cross and the move of God within your life. So in Exodus chapter 4, I'm not going to read through all of this from beginning to end. It's a lot of stuff. But it begins to talk about how God gives Moses signs to show the Israelites. Okay, he tells Moses to throw his rod down. It's turned into a snake. His hand would be leprous if he put it into his bosom, and then whole again when he took it out and put it back in. Okay. God also makes it where if he takes water out of the river and puts it on dry land, it will turn to blood. So God creates these series of signs so that Moses will believe and so that the Israelites will believe. God's got a plan right now because in the garden, okay, relationship and that connection was destroyed between God and man. God used to walk daily with Adam, and because of sin there was a separation, and so God is wanting to draw his people out of Egypt, have a tabernacle built so that he can dwell among man again. Okay, so God does not walk with Moses physically. He uses angels to talk to his people, and he uses his own voice to come down because of that separation in the garden. So God gives these series of signs, okay, which I think is very awesome of God, because we see in the New Testament, we see in the New Testament where Jesus says, "Blessed are those who believe and don't see." Okay, everyone was always wanting a sign, and whenever they see a sign, they still don't believe. So sometimes we almost feel bad for wanting to see signs, okay? Well, signs and wonders accompanied Jesus wherever he went and increased people's faith, and it brought humility. No matter what God shows, the issue is that some people will still just not believe, or they keep wanting more and more. So God didn't expect the Israelites to just take Moses' word for it. He gave Moses signs for them. And God doesn't have a problem showing us his power through his signs and wonders and miracles, because it brings people to him and it strengthens our faith. The problem lies in refusing to follow him wholeheartedly unless he continues to prove himself to you. God does not have to prove himself to you. The Israelites continually tempted God over and over and always wanted another sign, to the point where they challenged God, and eventually that got them in trouble. Okay, the sign and the revelation is always there anyway. We just don't always know how to uncover it, or have the sign, that which is unseen by us, become revealed to us. So 400 years his people have been in Egypt. He's going to deliver them because he has heard their cry. Okay, it's time. He's going to do it in such a way that it is a sign and a wonder to them, the Israelites, and to the Egyptians and everyone surrounding who find out what happens there. The whole multitude of humanity is going to get wind of this. Okay, did you hear what happened over in Egypt? Did you hear what happened with the slaves that they had? Okay, the whole earth is going to hear this. Even after God brings them out of Egypt, he shows them a cloud by day, pillar of fire by night. He parts the Red Sea. Moses strikes a rock and water comes out. He brings manna every morning. He is constantly showing a sign and a wonder among his people. And all these things he shows and does so that people will believe that he is God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He wants to make them happy. He wants to increase their faith and show his power in the process. But as soon as the needs of their flesh get in the way, all of a sudden, they're hungry again. They're getting a little thirsty. Okay, they start complaining, and woe is us. God brought us out of Egypt just to let us die here. Okay, like they needed immediate gratification and didn't know how to strive or endure. They had a difficult time changing and walking in a new way. Sometimes people have a hard time growing past their salvation experience. We're brought out of bondage, and all of a sudden the honeymoon wears off, and thoughts of the pleasures before come creeping in. Okay, it's referred to as a dog turning back to its own vomit. Okay, to mature in life, you have to get rid of immediate gratification and learn endurance. So God is patient, and he would give the Israelites another sign, and he would meet their need. And what he did not put up with was them worshiping something else. Okay, you want to complain and moan and groan, that's fine. God can handle you, but you do not worship false gods or images. You don't turn to idle satisfaction. You do not worship God in the morning and then Baal in the evening. When God sends Moses to the Israelites had come under oppression. And there are parallels that we see to America today of what was going on with Egypt then. The king at the time, or the Pharaoh over Egypt, in concordance with the Egyptian people, they got scared over the Israelites growing and multiplying and being so many and so powerful. And we see that today. Satan sees that the members of the church in this land are many and the church is powerful. And so Pharaoh begins to take the Israelites under bondage in order to prevent them from one day being able to be so strong that he is overthrown himself. So much like ancient Egypt, there have been great efforts taken to oppress God's people and keep them under the rule of the world's laws and not God's, and try to blend them into culture where they lose their identity. So Pharaoh brings bondage over the Israelites. He sets taskmasters over them, which is also construed in areas that references taxing them. And no matter what he does, they still multiply. So he begins killing all the baby boys that are born, okay, having them aborted. People have tried in this nation to wall in Christianity, but God will not be put in a box or contained. We live in a time today where the church will still grow no matter the oppression because of the Spirit of God and revival. And in the meantime, it is constantly fighting off the bondage this nation is trying to force on her, and the world's tactics. So what happens when God shows up? That's kind of what I want to show the parallel of. When God brought these 10 plagues against the Egyptians, he was moving in to bring down the spiritual places of worship that demonic spirits had set themselves up in. And today, when God brings judgment against the nation, what does he do? What spiritual altars of worship have been set up in order to serve idols? So when the voice of God's people cry out to him, he brings them redemption, and he brings signs and wonders that come with him. Okay, God brings the 10 plagues. This is over a period of time that can't really be agreed upon, but these plagues showed everyone that the God of the Hebrews was the most powerful God, and he used their own beliefs against them. At this time, there was integration. Many of the Israelites had started worshiping these same gods that the Egyptians worshipped. And if God would not have come to redeem them, eventually they would have blended into the Egyptian ways and culture so much that their identity would have disappeared. Like today, God has called the church to be separate and not let what everyone else in the nation is doing be what we are doing. Come out from among them, the Bible says, and be separate. Separate is holy. Be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of our mind. God brings light to our soul, and it transforms us. So God is going to show that he is the only God. The Egyptians worshipped many different gods and goddesses. Most every god type through Egypt, Rome, and mythology has a hint of truth and lineage that traces back to fallen angels and their offspring. Exodus 12 and 12 says this: "For I will pass through the land of Egypt this night, and will smite all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am the Lord." Okay, let me say that again. It says, "And against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment." God brought the judgment against Satan, and he brought the judgment against the various devils that had set themselves up to be exalted and worshipped. The fall of Satan from the very beginning, it's always been about worship. God created us. He created us for worship. We worship him, and at some point in time, Lucifer said, "Hey, I want worship also," and so he fell. And Satan still tries on this earth today to get people knowingly or unknowingly to worship him. He wants to take the worship and the relationship with God and have it for himself. It results in leading humanity astray. So with these 10 plagues, God literally tears down the altars of worship that Satan has built in the spiritual realm. In Exodus 7, verses 8 through 12, we see where God has Moses and Aaron cast down a rod, and it turns into a snake. And Pharaoh's like, "Yeah, whatever, I can do the same thing." So his magicians throw down snakes of their own, but the rod of God eats the rods of the magicians. If you look up cobra snakes, the king cobra actually eats other snakes. Pharaohs had snakes on their headdresses. Okay, it was a symbol that they used. So God uses their symbol of worship against them. The spirit realm is controlled by Moses and Aaron's God, not by Satan. The Egyptian Pharaoh would only respect the most powerful, but yet God hardens his heart because God's going to make a point. So if you look at the background picture that I have on here, my marker board, I've listed the 10 plagues for you that come against the Israelites. The first thing that happens is the waters turn to blood. The Egyptians worshiped the Nile. They worshiped water. They worshiped creation gods. And so God turns this water into blood. Basically, every river, every pond, every stream, every vessel filled with water is turned into blood. It kills all the fish. And the magicians are able to mimic this. And then the second plague that comes against them are the frogs. Okay, they worship frog gods. And the frogs came into the houses and the bedchambers and the beds and the ovens and the kneading troughs, okay? And the magicians mimic and call frogs from the water, okay? But now all of these frogs die and they're gathered up and they're heaped up and it makes the land stink. So here the Egyptians who worship frog gods are looking at a whole heap of dead frogs stinking across the land. God is showing his might and his power. You might want to think twice about worshiping a bunch of frogs because they're all sitting there dead. They have no power. The third one is lice. The dust actually becomes lice, and it affects man and beast. And the magicians are now unable to mimic what God does. Exodus 8 and 19, the magicians say this is the finger of God. God takes away their ability to worship the devil through this because the priests were not able to do their priestly duties if they had lice. The Egyptians hated lice. The next plague that comes are the flies, and this affects the Egyptians only. The houses and the grounds are swarmed with flies. We begin to see a division between God's people and the people of the world, because they're seeing that the Israelites are not affected, but yet they are. A lot of times judgment will come and it will affect the church and the world. But when the wrath of God comes, it affects the world only. The wrath is reserved for the sinner and not the saint. Next we see the murrain that comes on the beasts, pestilence and disease. It happens to all of the Egyptians' animals, their cattle, their horses, their donkeys, camels, oxen, sheep. Okay, but it does not affect the Israelites' animals. And then we see the boils come, and that falls on man and beast. Also falls on the magicians. And then we see the hail come. The Egyptians worshipped the sky, and they worshipped air gods. And what's interesting is when this hail comes, it says it had never been seen of this magnitude before in Egypt. So God allows that anyone, at this point now, he's saying, anyone who fears me and my word and will obey me, you're going to be spared. Now he's showing his mercy and that he's not a respecter of persons. Whether you're an Israelite or an Egyptian, if you will follow me, you will be spared from this hail, and you can show that to me with your faith by getting all of your beasts and your servants to flee to their houses. Fire is mixed with the hail, and there is thunder. Everything that's in the field, the man, the beast, the herb, it gets destroyed and breaks every tree. And here we see where it says, the Lord is righteous, and I and my people are wicked, Pharaoh says. Next comes the locust. They eat what's left of the hail after the hail damage, and there's no green thing left. And Pharaoh's servants finally say, hey, know you not yet that Egypt is destroyed. So then we see darkness comes, and this darkness is so thick you can feel it. Egyptians worship the sun gods, okay, Ra, and they worship the moon gods. There's no mistake. God is saying, I am light. You cannot see in front of your face unless I allow it. And they stayed for 3 days in the specific spot that they were in. It was so dark and thick they could not move. And the last plague that comes against them is the death of the firstborn. And God consecrates his people. God shows that he controls life and death. Okay, the Egyptian pharaohs thought that if when they died, if they were buried with clay servants and gold and jewels, and in the afterlife they had all of those things with them. And God is showing that he controls life, and he is the author and the finisher. And the Passover is established. So my question for you is, what would God do today to destroy the gods of this world, to destroy the gods of this nation, to judge them, and to show his wonders and redeem his people? I shared before in another message that I had a dream of my mother, who in the dream she was sleeping, but the powerful voice of God was prophesying through her and speaking of the different leaders of the nations of this world. And like that hail that came against the Egyptians where they had never seen it to that magnitude before, so in this dream and the prophecy through my mother, God was saying that these things were coming upon the nation and the nations of this world, such as had never been seen by us before. The number 10, there were 10 plagues. The number 10 is a number for human infirmity. It's a number for failure, and the number for law. Okay? Yod, Y-O-D, is the 10th letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and it depicts an arm or a hand. The Hebrew letters have a picture, a word, and a number with every letter. But Yod is the 10th letter. It depicts an arm or a hand. It's part of all the letters and numbers in the Hebrew alphabet. So with the symbol of the 10 plagues, with the symbol of the number 10, we see God's mighty, powerful arm. In dream and vision, when you dream of your right arm, it is your power and relationship with God. So with the waving of his mighty arm, with 10 plagues and judgments against the Egyptians, against the world, against Satan, he's saying, humanity belongs to me. Relationship is going to be restored. It is going to be restored by serving the one true God, because I am God. With the symbol of the number 10, we see 10 things in which God created, 10 in generations, 10 commandments. 10th part is holy to God. There are 10 days of awe with the season of Yom Kippur. So today we see that God is going to tear down the world's gods, and he's going to tear down America's gods. So what are America's gods? And I would encourage you to ponder that and think, what has become worship in this nation? Be it oil, economy, technology, TV, internet, satellites, food, houses, drugs, materialism, the arrogance of the famous, the political, the athletic. What altars of worship have been set up? There's an increase in violence. There's an increase in hatred. There's an increase in natural disasters and diseases coming back, which we thought had left. Okay? God is bringing judgment, and he's going to bring wrath. So where do we stand in that? All we have to do is obey him, and we are set free from it. And we examine our own lives and our own heart to make sure that there is nothing in our life that has been set up that can exalt itself against the knowledge of God and against who he is. I thank you for listening with me, and this is the Reverend Christy.